I would say now what's mostly on my mind is China possibly invading Taiwan. I think, we saw the ripple effect of Russia's full-on war in Ukraine and how that's interrupted supply chains and access to energy and grain, and who knows the long-lasting repercussions from that since the war is still ongoing. There's no secret there's been animosity between China and the US for a long time, and there's kind of a back and forth with them. But if China does decide to invade Taiwan, what do we do? Are the governments gonna go at them full force or in a escalated way like they did with Russia? Or are they gonna, maybe pander to them because they're so intertwined with their economies? So I think about that. Sure. My name is Louie Vargas. As you can tell from my accent, I'm not from Denmark originally. From New York City, born and raised. Right now, I'm doing scheme compliance at NEXI. And but most of my experience is in the financial industry space in financial crime, so focusing on sanctions and other pillars of financial crime, but mostly sanctions.
Right. And I understand you're also chair of the NEXI?
ACFCS, yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about what that is?
Sure. So it's the Association of Certified Financial Crime Specialists. There you go. And we're representing the Nordics. Yeah, so when I moved here, I thought there was a need for a community to share information, to benchmark around these different topics of risk and compliance and financial crime. And, I don't know if it was just, the energy of being shy and not really being open, but also just the maybe lack of expertise in the region. I know they're bringing a lot of expats in to help kind of remediate some of the problems these institutions are facing, which is, a big reason why I'm here. So I just found it that, they needed to be a voice to help spread this information. I spoke to ACFCS because I've been a member and certified for a number of years. And, they said, yeah, we'll be interested in kind of helping you build this community. So we launched in December of 2022, so still fairly new. But we're scheduling stuff for this year, both in person and virtual. But a big thing for me also was building the community in the Nordic, right? The Nordic countries, because it's not just about Denmark or Copenhagen. I mean, this is a big part of it, especially Stockholm. That's where a lot of these fintechs and financial industries are. But I wanted to focus on the entire region. So in our board, I made sure we have representation for the whole region so that we could try to tap into the things that they need in those countries, what things they're interested in. I guess the pitch that I always say is, this is my way of being a superhero or like kind of a crime fighter, because I just don't have the heart to be a police officer or a paramedic because I can't see people injured. Having superpowers is not real. But so this really speaks to my, being in this industry speaks to my curiosity because I love research. So I love digging into these hard kind of transactions or looking into different kind of corporate patterns because that's super interesting. And then down the road, it's kind of a help to society where we could kind of help safeguard it. And also, I think two big things in my life. 9/11, everybody is aware of, right? The tragedy in the United States when it came to those terrorist attacks. And then in, forget the year, but in Barcelona, where the terrorist attacks were there, I was just a couple of blocks away from when that happened. Being so close to those events and also just my love for research and kind of, digging through and finding stuff out really led me down this path. Yeah, so I mean, financial crime has a lot of different, I guess, tentacles, as maybe I could put it. But generally speaking, it's wherever criminals could, launder funds or hide funds for their illicit or nefarious activity. So that's the form of, money laundering. That takes the form of tax evasion. Sanctions evasion. So there's many things that encompass the financial crime. And it's just basically, criminals figuring out ways to move their money around and make it seem legitimate. I've been doing this for almost 10 years now, and you would think that some of the challenges would shift, and some have, but I would say that it's still largely based on data, having good, clean data, and that could mean during the onboarding stages of KYC, which it's super important, and I feel like it's always, kind of thought of as an afterthought, because it's like, well, this is just the onboarding stage, but no, this is where you're starting the relationship. You need the right information to know who they are, who they're doing business with, all those things. So. That's one thing. I think too, in still the data world is, a lot of companies have old data warehouses. They've, over time acquired other businesses, and instead of integrating it as they've acquired businesses, they left it separate. So now, then you end up having a massive company with all these different sources of data that are not talking to each other. And then what happens, what I've seen, is that, a regulator comes in and they say, this is not the appropriate way to do your work. You have all these things not talking to each other. You can't get proper reporting, fix it. So then it's just a mad dash to then dump all of the data together and then figuring out how to make it work. And, we were having an interesting conversation about scale and, how fintechs should scale their compliance. And I think, not only can fintechs learn from this, but financial institutions, right? It's like, don't procrastinate. If you're obtaining more data, figure out how you could. Don't say, I'll leave it for tomorrow, because then it's going to be just a larger issue.
Right.
And then lastly, I would say technology. Technology is getting better, but it's a blessing and a curse, because now the market is saturated with just a plethora of data providers, of case management tools, reporting tools, and that could also paralyze people from making the decisions they need to. And then you have people in thinking about tech that they just trust the old guard, the old companies, because they say, oh, they've been around, they're trustworthy, and they don't look at the new innovations that are happening in fintech, and I think that's a problem. But the good side of it is that these new fintechs are pushing these old companies to rethink what they're doing and provide a better product instead of this cookie cutter approach that they have been for so long. AI gets thrown around so much that people don't really understand what it is or how we use it. Right now, the way we use it is more in the machine learning aspect. So it's a very small part of AI, because what we do is there's a lot of gray area in what we do. So you can't just rely on a machine to do it, right? Because you still need humans to program the machine, the computer, for it to know what to do, right? And it learns with repeatable tasks. So this is where machine learning comes in, right? So it says, okay, you set the parameter of how many times a human has to do a certain action before the robot could take over, or the computer could take over, and look at the patterns. If it matches what a human did, and they could just repeat it. Okay, that's great. If there's any changes, the robot says, stop, we need a human to look at it. That's where we're at mostly in this space. But when you're thinking about AI as a whole, that's taking in a whole bunch of different factors. You're giving the computer, the robot, to actually make decisions on their own, to infer and do different things. And I think we're not there yet when it comes to our industry, because there's so much gray area that you don't want then to rely on the robot to then make these decisions without being checked. And so maybe at some point we will trust the robots and the computers to do more of that, but I think there will be still human intervention to really stay on top of it. And I did this interesting online AI ethical certification, and it talks about that, right? It's not just relying on a machine to do something. You have to rely on also, how you're teaching it, the information you're giving it, that there's no bias. You have to know what the machine is doing, right? I've been in a lot of meetings where a regulator or an auditor come in and say, okay, how is machine learning helping you? And the people just shrug their shoulders, like, it's just helping us make decisions. But no, you have to really understand how it's doing it and why it's doing it. And I feel like, people just say, oh, well, it's okay, the machine's doing it. No, you have to really be on top of it.
Right.
So yeah, I think, so that's the blessing and the curse when it comes to using AI and ML, is that, it does help humans concentrate on more of the risk and the things you really need them to focus on. But if you rely on it too much and blindly, there could be repercussions. Yeah, I think it's making its way, and where I see that is there are some companies that they're selling compliance as a service. So, they themselves are a financial company, and they said, okay, well, we have to do this for ourselves, and we do it fairly well. So what if we then pitch this to other financial companies that are similar to us and say, you know what, we understand the burden and we understand the issues you face. How about you let us handle it for you? And then you have that. I mean, then once that happens, you kind of have to, build these kind of Chinese walls, because you don't want because then you're really delving into their data. So you have to really protect that. But yeah, I've seen that, and that's, I think, a growing model, I would say. And I think, if you, maybe not so much here, but a lot of this big term I heard in the US is like the best in class, right? That's a big thing. You want to be kind of the best at what you do. And that's the same thing in compliance. So if you have a really great, financial crime program, compliance risk program, whatever it is, it should be that, you can celebrate that and like say, okay, listen, this is what we're doing great things. Obviously nothing's perfect, but we're protecting our customers because we're doing all this and that. A self-driving car has a whole bunch of sensors around it to warn you if you're moving the lanes, if there's something too close to you. And this is what compliance is. We want to help the business stay on the road, stay safe. If they choose to divert from that, we'll sound the alarms, we'll try to nudge them back into the lane, but they ultimately decide what they want to do. So they could either, have an exception request, as we call it in the industry, and they could decide, okay, we heard compliance, but we're going to do our own thing, and that's them changing lanes even though they shouldn't. Or they could say, okay, we hear the alarm, we're going to stay on course. And I think if we could really communicate that well to the business, that we're not here to be in your way, we're not here to make life hard, we want to partner with you to do it right, to do it the right way. Funny you would ask that. I think I would say now what's mostly in my mind is China possibly invading Taiwan. I think, we saw the ripple effect of Russia's full-on war in Ukraine and how that's interrupted supply chains and access to energy and grain, and who knows the long-lasting repercussions from that since the war is still ongoing. There's no secret, there's been animosity between China and the US for a long time, and there's kind of a back and forth with them. But if China does decide to invade Taiwan, right? A lot of our electronics are from China. They're from Taiwan. What do we do? You know, are the governments gonna go at them full force or in a escalated way like they did with Russia? Or are they gonna, you know, maybe pander to them because they're so intertwined with their economies? So I think about that. And also the reason why is because when I was at and the war was, you know, kind of being rumored to start between Russia and Ukraine, you know, I took it upon myself and with a colleague of mine to look at the data to see if a war does happen and the US does sanction Russia the way they were threatening, like all their banks would be off of SWIFT and, you know, these industries would be affected. I wanted to see what would be the impact to the bank and also to our customers. And we put together a narrative, you know, with the data. And when we shared that with the business, the first line, they thought we were crazy. They says, the war's never gonna happen. Why are you wasting our time with this? We have to do other things. And it's like, okay, that's fair enough. But it's escalated enough for you to at least be aware of what you should keep in mind if something does happen. And, you know, lo and behold, the war does happen, and, you know, it left the business a bit still struggling a bit, but still, because of our analysis, they were a bit ahead of the game. So, you know, I think that more, you know, businesses need to kind of have that a bit forward thinking. You know, and I know there's a fine line between over-compliance and you know, compliance. And that's different, right? Just compliance, people have different meanings. You know, people just say, well, what does the law say? And if we abide by that, that's compliance. But the law is just a starting point. That's the bare minimum. You're just scratching the surface when it comes to the law. You know, we have to think of the spirit of the law. We have to think of, okay, because of our experience, what other risks are around that? And a lot of times you're fighting against the, you know, the tone from the top, because you're saying, well, okay, you're saying you want us to be compliant with certain things, but then you just want us to do bare minimum. And that's not enough anymore. You could see that. A lot of companies are getting into trouble because they're doing just the bare minimum. Like what I mentioned earlier on, you know, the fintechs that are popping up and regtechs and all that are really, I guess, driving the innovation for us, right? It's funny because a few years ago I was working with one of my colleagues who I worked with, had the fortunate opportunity to work with them both at JP Morgan when we first were getting started in the industry, and then we worked together again at Deutsche Bank. And now he's with one of the regulators in the United States. And we would always say, man, if we could work with a tech company, we could build the best, you know, case management tool. We could build the best filters because we understand what the risks are. And all these other companies, you know, again, they're trying to do bare minimum and sell just their product and then their enhancements to the product instead of let's just get it right and do upgrades as we need. And now with all these fintechs and regtechs, you could see they're pushing all those old companies to rethink that business model and say, okay, we really have to add value here. So it's not just dumping data on my desk anymore. It's like, okay, well, based on all this data that fits my, let's say, search, what does the you know, AI feel is most important for me to review based on the industry I'm in, or maybe my previous search, right? Kind of highlight what I should really focus on, help me prioritize. Because, you know, let's face it, if you just do a Google search on something, it could leave you with dozens of pages, depending on what it is. You're not going to flick through each link, each page, right? So you need something to help you. So we have a lot of those companies coming out and saying, hey, we know how to scrub the internet for data, and we could help you prioritize what you should look at. You know, vessel screening for a long time was getting ignored. And it was like, well, how do you do this more efficiently, right? It's not just, and it's not only about the name of the vessel, it's the IMO number. It's like their social security number. where the vessel's going. And we talked about the Nordics being such a trusting region. I've heard the argument, oh, my customer is here in Norway, or my customer is here in Denmark. Low risk country, they're safe. And it's like, well, but who are they doing business with? If they're in the shipping industry, where are those vessels going? What kind of goods are they delivering? And then you get a shrug of the shoulder. It's like, this is not good enough anymore. And I hope you could also use the ACFCS Nordic chapter as a resource, because that's what we want to do. Anybody who has questions about different topics, reach out to us. If we don't have the answer, we'll hopefully put you in the right direction to somebody who will help you.